In this session of discussion, we'll be turning our attention to a different kind of theory of social change. So far we have been discussing theories which go by the name of linear theories. Line or a straight line was the imagery in those theories. Now we'll be looking into cyclical theories derived from the word cycle, some kind of a circle. Cyclical theories of social change do not see societies develop in a linear fashion from a low point to a high point, but it sees societies develop or progress as we might measure against some accepted yardstick of development or progress. They develop or progress up to a high point. Then at that point it exhausts its progressive capacities, its progressive nature gets eroded seriously, and it starts on a downhill journey till it reaches the lowest stage. From its lowest stage, which is nadir, it once again starts climbing up the highest stage, its zenith, and the process is repeated all over again and again, and that's the main point of cyclical theories of social change. According to it, civilizations are born, they grow, they start decaying, ultimately meet their death, and in its place a new one is born. It grows, reaches the fullest point, starts decaying, meets its death, some kind of parallel with an organic entity. Two of the most important thinkers of this cyclical school of social change were Oswald Arnold Gottfried Spengler and Arnold J. Toynbee. We start with Spengler. Oswald Spengler, who lived between 1880 and 1936, was a German historian and a philosopher of history, whose interests included mathematics, science, and art. Spengler, in 1918 and in 1922, brought out 2 volumes of his magnum opus, The Decline of the West. The first volume coming out in 1918 to be followed by the second volume in 1922. When The Decline of the West was first published in 1918 in German language, it became a wild success. It became one of the most read books of the time, and Germans liked it. Now just explaining the background in a short fashion. 1918 was the time when the First World War has just ended, 1914 to 1918 First World War. Germany has lost the war, and the great powers, by virtue of the Versailles Treaty, has imposed a set of humiliating conditions on Germany. They had to financially compensate the victorious side, known as reparations. Not only it was defeated, devastated, but also it was humiliated. Now this once great German nation found in Spengler's writing some kind of a hope, because Spengler wrote that if civilizations can decay, it can once again be born in a new fashion, and that gave the Germans of the 1920s something to hope for about their nation. Now, what did Spengler try to tell us in his The Decline of the West? What were his basic ideas? First, his basic idea was that the linear view of social change must be rejected totally. And the linear progression, which I've discussed in quite detailed fashion over the last few sessions, the linear progression supposes a journey from a lower to a higher point, like climbing up a ladder, one step at a time till reach the highest point. Now, Spengler was forthright in holding out that this linear view should be totally rejected. Society, according to him, does not progress in a linear fashion. Secondly, now, when he's talking about the cyclical way of social change, the cyclical movements of history, Spengler was not talking about mere nations or states or races or events. He was talking about high cultures, H capital and C capital. Now, high cultures is some kind of a umbrella term. It includes within itself civilization, culture, nation, states, races, and everything. It's not just any one of these, but a combination of all these. Some kind of a holistic view of human life. Now, Spengler says that history has given us 8 high cultures: the Indian, the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the Chinese, the Mexican, that is the Myan-Aztec, the Arabian, the classical, the Greece and Rome, and European Western. Each high culture having its own symbols, having its own modes of thought, having its own civilizational characteristics. Now, these high cultures are living things. They are organic in nature, and they pass through the cycles of or stages of birth, development, fulfillment, decay, and death, just as an organic being does. And this morphology of history was what we find in Spengler's writings. And according to him, all previous cultures have passed through this process, this phase. Now, there are certain terms which Spengler uses, terms which have to be explained. That when high culture follows that stage of birth, growth, development, maturity or fulfillment, and decay. Let's come to the point of decay. When there starts the downward journey, so long it is an upward journey. At that point of time, the transition point of growth and decay, at the transition point, culture ceases to exist and civilization takes its place. Now, this may sound to be a mere play with the words, but for that, or to solve that confusion, we have to look into what Spengler meant by civilization. Now, civilization phase is a human society without the cultural component. It is a time of drastic social upheavals, revolutions, large-scale migration of people from countryside to the urban areas, from one country to other countries, continuous wars and other sorts of crises. There is a large-scale urbanization. The rural areas are shrinking people are living rural areas, people are living agriculture, and urban areas are growing. And this is, according to Spengler, was the process of dying out of a culture. And with this civilization, according to Spengler, comes its twin tools, money and democracy. Now, money rules over the chaos, and money profits by the chaos, and democracy, which perhaps Spengler meant it in the Aristotelian sense. Aristotle was when Aristotle meant democracy, referred to democracy, he meant some kind of a mobocracy, rule of the mobs. The same kind of a sense of pejoration, a sense of looking down upon democracy, was in Spengler's writings also. Now, there comes a time when all the negative sides of human civilization comes to the forefront. Chaos, corruption, crisis, life's danger, and topped by some kind of a facade democracy beyond which money plays its own game. Those who are still with the high culture, those still the people of the high culture, they haven't died out. High culture might have died out, but they haven't died out. They started regrouping themselves to bring back the old order, to bring back the whole old high culture type of society. And since men were not having a good life, they're also highly discontent group. They naturally wanted to go back to the glorious past. So the people or the leaders of the high culture got support of the common people, and they amassed huge power in their hands. Common people, in some kind of maybe a Hobbesian sense, they transferred all their powers to these men of high culture. So they became highly powerful individuals with all the popular support behind them, with all the cultural input within them. They became the Caesars, a time which Spengler identified as the age of Caesars. And these Caesars, they start battling for control of the earth. Now, are we finding in this idea, or can we find in this idea some kind of an imagery of the First World War, which Lenin described as fights between imperialist powers over who will control how much market. So the age of Caesars ends in some kind of imperialism and imperialist warfare. Warfare is to control the earth. So, in a nutshell, there's chaos all around, and people were simply disenchanted of the life they had come to enjoy, life they have to live, and they are trying to go back to their past occupations, past value systems, in a word, the glorious past. So out of all this chaos, there was a rebirth of a longing to return to the days of yore, to return to the previous culture. There's born some kind of a second religiosity, a replication of the earlier one high culture replacing another high culture which has met its death. It is some kind of a phoenix being born out of the fire which has burnt out the earlier phoenix. And once again, the cycle starts with the birth of the new high culture. It grows, it matures, it reaches high point, and there starts the decay. Once again, a new kind of civilizational crisis takes place, and the entire system is replaced by a third new high culture. The second most important thinker of this cyclical school of social change was Arnold J. Toynbee. Toynbee was a British historian who published his 12-volume writing on history of human development. The name was A Study of History. And it theorized that, these 12 volumes theorized that all civilizations pass through several distinct stages: genesis, growth, time of trouble, universal state, and disintegration. All civilizations pass through these stages: genesis, that's birth; growth, time of trouble, universal state, and disintegration. In these 12 volumes, A Study of History, Toynbee looked into the birth, growth, and decay of some 21 to 23 major civilizations in the world. To name a few of them: the Egyptian, the Andean, the Sumeric, the Mayan, the Indic, the Western, etc. Now, what happens? What is the process? We have just seen in Spengler some kind of a process of growth, birth, growth, decay, death, and rebirth once again. Societies develop, they acquire expertise in solving problems which they have to face normally. Now, they go on amassing solutions to problems as they face, till they come to a stage when they have overdeveloped their structures for solving problems, and they cannot solve anymore any new problem. Now, all these ways of solving problems were being done by a small group of people in every civilization, known as creative minority. Now, this creative minority more and more were fixated on old methods of solving problem. They were thus unable to cope with new problems which came over the horizon. And they became, so long they were a creative minority, so long they could solve the problems which civilizations faced, with the loss of that faculty, they degenerated into what Toynbee termed as a dominant minority, which forces majority to obey without deserving that allegiance. As long as they are in the creative phase, they are doing something positive for the society, for the civilization, and people are obeying them or paying allegiance to them on that ground. When they have ceased to be creative and got turned into some kind of a dominant minority, they are using mainly force to subjugate people. They could no longer command their willful obedience because they have lost their creative faculties. Now, these creative minorities, at this point, when they become creative minority, when they become a dominant minority, in order to perpetuate their rule, their control over society, they create some kind of a universal state. Once again, a Toynbee term, a universal state. And this in universal state, all forms of creativity are stifled. No individual liberty, no individual creative liberty was allowed. Now, naturally, there would be resistance against this taking away of individual liberty. Now, two sets of people, according to Toynbee, come up: internal proletariat and external proletariat. The internal proletariat are people within that particular civilizational society who are resenting the loss of their freedom, who are resenting to pay their allegiance on the basis of force. They became hateful towards rulers. They made the violence of the rulers with their own violence. There came about a time of some kind of internal rebellion, some kind of internal revolution. And the external proletariat are the warmongers of other nations. Now, this internal proletariat, through their struggle with the universal state, through the struggle to restore their creative liberty, the struggle to restore their freedom, they created among themselves some kind of a bonding, some kind of a new group which wants to see a new kind of civilization being born. This new group, this new bonding, this new community, Toynbee calls a universal church. A universal church. Now, in this particular environment, when people are living some sort of hopeless life, being faced by some kind of universal state, they took two possible ways: either lapsing into the past or looking into the future. They are trying to forget their present. The present is not acceptable to them. So they lapsed into the past. Times glorious, how glorious was the past, all such kinds of feeling, a propensity to recreate the lost times, the lost situations. And other was to look into the future, to create some kind of a future society. Now, out of all these actions and interactions was born the new community, Toynbee's universal church, which was trying to bring in a rebirth, trying to bring in a new civilization, the birth of a new civilization which would start growing once again. Now, this is how Toynbee was trying to explain the process of social change. He tried to be empirical. He tried to build up his theory on the basis of historical evidence, as he studied more than 20 human civilizations, and tried to show that we all know that civilizations have come and gone. He had to show that in their coming into being and going out of existence, there is a definite process. And was trying to portray that process through stages of growth, maturity, decay, and ultimate death. The kind of creative minority being created, the creative minority degenerating into some kind of a dominant minority, the dominant minority creating some kind of a universal state, which was just a euphemism for a dictatorial state in which people had no rights. The people are slowly rising up against this kind of universal dictatorial state, and they are grouping together, and ultimately this universal state meets with its death, and this new grouping gives birth to a new civilization, which would once again follow the previous stages and would once again meet with its own death to pave the way for a further new civilization. And that was the cycle of birth, growth, decay, and death of civilizations, of human societies, of social changes alongside, which we found in the cyclical theories of social change as explained to us by Oswald Spengler or by Arnold Toynbee.